Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Veronica stared at Max in astonishment. What a meeting! To not see each other for over a year and run into each other under these circumstances. You couldn't make it up. Truth be told, Max hadn't noticed his ex-wife yet. He was among friends, dressed up, a bit puffed up, with an expression of evident self-satisfaction on his face. Veronica hadn't noticed before how ridiculous and unpleasant Max looked. She used to think he was very smart and confident. Self-respect was a good quality, indeed, but it seemed this person only had respect for himself. Angel, catching Veronica's gaze, looked at her questioningly. It seems that's... Yes, it's him, she nodded with a slight smile. Should we leave? Why? Veronica was genuinely surprised. I like it here. Everything's fine. Well, as you wish. Angel encouragingly patted Veronica on the shoulder. His touch always calmed and relaxed her. Just like this time. What luck they had met, otherwise Veronica would have remained firmly convinced that all men were like her ex-husband. At that moment, Max was earnestly telling something to the people sitting next to him, with a knowing look on his face. He reminded Veronica of a turkey puffed up with pride. Veronica knew some of the people sitting at the table. There were two of Max's best friends with their wives. Veronica never particularly liked the company of these people. She didn't even know what to talk to them about. They had no common interests or points of connection. Max's friends' spouses were insincere, unfriendly, fake, and narrow-minded in her eyes. So Veronica felt like an outsider in their company and hoped that the boring and tedious evening with his friends would end soon. At home, she usually endured her husband's accusations of being unsociable. Sitting there like you're mentally retarded, can't even say a word, I'm ashamed to have such a wild wife. Veronica even felt guilty and apologized. At the time, she had thought that Max was right, she was a bad wife, and maybe she was stupid if she couldn't even talk to people. Veronica. She just hadn't had any experience with men before. That's probably why she hadn't realized right away what kind of person her husband was. Max had taken her by storm, with his self-confidence, creating an image of a successful and intelligent person, behind whom his wife would be like a stone wall. That's how the very young Veronica lost her head, and over time, she felt sorry and scared to break those relationships. Veronica grew up without a father. She and her mother lived in a small one-room apartment on the outskirts of the city. The neighborhood wasn't prestigious or prosperous, but just outside the window, there was a wonderful open field, vast and covered in tall grass, crisscrossed by wide paths. Beyond the field was a bypass road, where huge trucks and lorries sped by. Sometimes Veronica would just sit on the broad windowsill and gaze. She watched the cars, the occasional pedestrians hurrying across the field, the kids flying kites. And the fantastic sunsets and sunrises she saw from the window of their one-room apartment with her mother were breathtaking. Veronica later tried to capture those scenes in drawings, but nothing turned out quite right. It seemed that artistic talent wasn't her fate. Veronica's childhood couldn't be described as financially comfortable. Her mother worked as an elementary school teacher, putting her heart and soul into her work. However, teachers were paid very little back then, and even those meager wages were often delayed. Veronica's mother often had to borrow money from neighbors until her paycheck arrived. There were days when the little families survived on rice and bread alone, but even then, Veronica's mother managed to make something interesting. She'd create a pie-like dish from vermicelli and a couple of eggs or bake savory and delicious flatbreads from flour. Veronica knew that money was tight, so she never asked for expensive gifts. But occasionally, her mother would take her to the market on the other side of town, where they would pick out some new clothes. These were cheap but cute items. Veronica's mother had excellent taste. She always bought things that suited her daughter incredibly well. Furthermore, Veronica had many friends and playmates in her courtyard. How eagerly this group looked forward to holiday, especially the summer ones. It meant games from morning till night on the open field, visits to each other's houses, and endless adventures. Sometimes Veronica and the other kids from her neighborhood would go to the cinema or the local amusement park. True, not as often as they'd like, because all the children came from families like Veronica's, give or take. Money wasn't abundant for anyone back then, but it didn't stop them from enjoying their childhood. Veronica's mother even managed to organize birthday parties on her modest salary. She'd set the table, bake the cake herself, make her amazing meatballs with mashed potatoes, and cut up fruits. It was wonderful. Veronica often looked back on her childhood with warmth and nostalgia. A sunny, happy, carefree time. Veronica didn't recall ever feeling upset about not having a father in her life. First of all, she wasn't alone in that among her peers. Her best friend Sarah's mother was also a single parent, and the neighbor Paolo was growing up without a father too. And many others. Secondly, her mother had told her that her father was an alcoholic, which was why they had divorced when Veronica wasn't even 3 years old. And Veronica knew who is a drunkard. The example of their upstairs neighbors was always before her eyes. Uncle Matteo would get drunk and create ugly scenes for his family. Shouting, swearing, the sound of furniture falling, the cries of the little ones who had to live through all of it. No thank you, Veronica didn't need that kind of happiness. Her father, after the divorce, seemed to be around at first. He spent time with his daughter, even paid minuscule child support. But then he started a new family, and he moved away to some remote village, forgetting about his older child. Since then, there had been no sign of him. Child support payments naturally stopped. His new children needed money too. Veronica's mother didn't even complain about it during the toughest times. "Let us be poor, at least we live in peace," she'd say. And that's worth a lot, believe me. And her daughter believed her without question. Besides, Veronica didn't consider herself to be living in poverty. Everything was fine for her. Yes, she didn't have a father, but she had the most wonderful, kind, sensitive, understanding mother. Her mother never scolded her for misdeeds. No. Instead, the woman would sit Veronica down and have long conversations with her. After those talks, Veronica's heart would always feel lighter and her mind clearer. She understood a lot through these conversations and tried to behave better next time. Veronica appreciated her mother's approach. She could clearly see how other adult neighbors raised their children. Sarah's mother would sometimes shout so loud that the windows shook, and Paolo would sometimes get spanked, and he would avoid going home, anticipating punishment. No, Veronica and her mother had a different relationship. Her mother supported her in everything and never scolded her, for example, for her grades. Veronica did a Veronicage in school. She was a good student due to her innate diligence and responsibility. She never dreamed of straight A's. School subjects didn't come that easily to her. But her mother wasn't so ambitious as to pressure her daughter or demand a flawless school certificate like some other teacher parents did. Veronica grew up and developed in a psychologically comfortable environment. However, in 5th grade, it became clear that the modest and unassuming girl, Veronica, also had her own talent. She showed an aptitude for foreign languages. In the 5th grade, they started learning French, and it quickly became evident that Veronica easily absorbed the material, effortlessly memorized words, and constructed complex sentences without errors. She had an intuitive feel for the language and grasped its basics easily. She even began studying French on her own using self-teaching materials, and she excelled at it too. Mother was proud of her daughter's achievements and supported her. Money was tight, but her mother still managed to find the means for foreign language courses at the Teen Development Center. Veronica simply fell in love with the place, enjoying everything about this wonderful educational institution, the atmosphere, the friendliness of the instructors, and the other students who were just as enthusiastic as she was. Veronica quickly progressed. By 9th grade, she already knew exactly where she would apply after school, the foreign languages department at the local university. The young lady couldn't see any other path for herself. Her mother supported her in this decision. "At least show some sympathy," Aunt Lola complained, Sarah's mom and a neighbor. "She's dragging you along her whole life." Go to college, learn a trade like tailoring or cooking. You'll have a profession in your hands, start earning in 3 years. It's easier for mother than to keep dragging you another 2 years in school, then 5 more at university. 7 whole years to be a burden on your mother. It's maddening. Lola, what are you saying? Veronica's mother, overhearing the conversation, exclaimed, raising her hands. This is her future. She's a natural-born translator. 7 years is nothing, they'll fly by unnoticed. Well, it's your business. Sarah, Aunt Lola's daughter and Veronica's best friend, joined a technical college to become a pastry chef. And indeed, after 3 years, she was already making decent money in a bakery. Veronica was still only a freshman then. Sarah started dressing more stylishly, going out to clubs with her new friends, putting on bright makeup. At first, she invited Veronica along, but what could Veronica do in comparison to a mature, independent friend? Firstly, she didn't have the money for all those outings. Secondly, university studies took up a lot of her time. So, it turned out that the paths of childhood friends diverged. But Veronica didn't despair. She had her own vibrant and fulfilling life. She loved everything about university. She was overjoyed when she found out she was accepted with a scholarship. And how happy her mother was. I always believed in you, her mother said on that memorable evening when the entrance exam results were announced. She was so happy that she even set the table for herself and her daughter. I never doubted that you would succeed, but of course, I was still nervous. But now I see that my worry was in vain. Go on, my dear, study hard, do your best. Now your future is in your hands, everything will work out for you. You're brilliant. And Veronica tried her best. She studied with enthusiasm. Veronica had never been a straight A student in school, but suddenly she became the top student in her class in uni. She even received an increased scholarship, which was very welcome. Of course, it was still a modest sum, but at least it covered her transportation expenses to the university for the month. Linguistics was taught to Veronica by Professor and Dean of the faculty, Senor Pasquale. He was already quite elderly, thin, with an elegant streak of gray in his hair, always impeccably dressed. No jeans or t-shirts like the younger teachers, only crisp white shirts, pleated trousers, vests, and jackets. There was a certain charm in that. Senor Pasquale was deeply passionate about his subject, something that was noticeable and captivating. In his lectures, students sat as quiet as mice, hanging on to the professor's every word. Time flew by in his classes, and naturally, his students excelled. For his exams, there was no need for intense preparation. Somehow, the material just seemed to fit perfectly in the students' minds, almost like magic. It was under Senor Pasquale's guidance that Veronica eventually wrote her final thesis. He was her favorite instructor, so she was elated when he agreed to be her advisor. The professor himself clearly held a warm regard for the talented student. You have a special gift. You have a great feel for languages, Senor Pasquale told Veronica more than once. A bright future awaits you. As it happened, during the course of working on her thesis, the professor and the student became close. Conversation seamlessly transitioned into personal topics. That was inevitable. Through these talks, Veronica learned that Senor Pasquale had a wife and a beloved dog named Nida, but they hadn't been blessed with children. Instead, he had practically raised his nephew, his sister's son. The boy's father had tragically died young, so the uncle stepped in to fill the role of a parent. It was Senor Pasquale who helped Veronica with her first job. He recommended her to some acquaintances of his in a travel agency. She was immensely grateful for this gesture. She understood how challenging it was to find a job for someone without experience or connections, and this worked out so wonderfully. My acquaintances will surely thank me multiple times for you, Senor Pasquale warmly smiled in response to Veronica's gratitude. And a completely different life began for Veronica. Firstly, she now had money in her hands, her very own money, not just some stipend. When she received her first paycheck, Veronica was taken aback by the unexpected sum. It was nearly 3 times her mother's monthly salary. Immediately, she bought all sorts of treats for the table, decided to throw a festive evening. She also chose a beautiful dress for her mother at the store. She knew her mother had long desired such a dress. Her mother even shed tears of joy for her daughter. And, of course, Veronica's gift touched her deeply. The moment has come when I can finally say that all of this wasn't in vain. That's the kind of toast her mother made that evening. I had no doubts, but still, I never thought that your destiny would align so favorably right from the start. Now, by the way, you can finally start thinking about your personal life. Personal life. Veronica somehow consistently overlooked this aspect. She was quite attractive and well aware of it. Her wheat-colored hair flowed just past her shoulders, her large hazel eyes held a captivating allure, her dark eyebrows arched gracefully. She had a slender, long-legged, tall figure. Veronica often caught the interested glances of guys and men, but she understood that it was too early for her to engage in any relationships. First, she needed to complete her studies and establish herself. Throughout all these years, she hadn't lost sight of her goals and wasn't ready to abandon her life plans for the sake of romance. Veronica simply wanted to establish herself first, to acquire a profession, become self-sufficient and independent, and then consider the rest. The example of her friend Sarah was before her eyes. Sarah had married almost immediately after finishing college. She got pregnant by another admirer and had to marry him. The guy was just like Sarah, neither educated nor accomplished. He was just a young lad, and moreover, from the countryside. Naturally, the couple moved into Sarah's mother's apartment. With more arguments and fights, peace and space diminished. And then Sarah gave birth to 3 daughters in a row. The arrival of each granddaughter was met by Aunt Lola, Sarah's mother, not with joy, but rather with annoyance. "Why are they breeding like rabbits?" she complained to her neighbors about these wayward young people. "6 of us live in a 2-room apartment, crowding each other. Sarah should have worked, but she's giving birth every year, and her good-for-nothing husband isn't any better, always chasing after himself, can't find anything. Fie on them." No, Veronica wanted something entirely different for herself. She envisioned a different future, an intelligent and caring husband who loved and cared for his wife, 2 children, a boy and a girl, a spacious apartment with good repairs. Veronica knew that this was how it would be now. With her good education, prestigious job, and solid salary, she had already opened a bank account and saved money there each month, working towards her dream, a separate home. Veronica, who had never seen the sea in her life, managed to visit India, Portugal, and Italy in just a couple of years. Working in a travel agency made it easy for her to buy last-minute vacation packages at a good price. She took her mother with her on these trips. It was such a joy to realize that she was fulfilling her beloved mother's lifelong dream. After all, Veronica's mother, who had lived to a venerable age, saw the sea for the first time. These memories warmed Veronica's heart. She was glad that she managed to make her mother happy, to show her a piece of the world. But as for her personal life, things weren't falling into place for Veronica. She wasn't skilled at interacting with men, lacking that experience. In school, Veronica wasn't particularly interested in boys, she was still quite young. Of course, many of her peers were already socializing with boys, but Veronica's interest in that area was kindled later. In university, it happened that there were hardly any guys in her class, it was a girls' faculty. And even if there were any, Veronica was focused on her studies and her career, she had no time for romance. And then Veronica simply began to fear men, they all seemed incomprehensible, loud, and strong to her. How to communicate with them? Who knows? Of course, men occasionally paid attention to Veronica, but she would get scared, flustered, and do everything to make another admirer go away as quickly as possible. Veronica realized that this situation wasn't normal. She had even considered seeing a psychologist to work through the traumas that hindered her personal life, but then he entered her life, Max. Handsome, well-groomed, stylishly and expensively dressed, tall, athletic, with impeccable manners, a regular at the gym, but not overly muscular, a light and confident stride, an enchanting smile. He visited their travel agency for work several times and always greeted Veronica with particular warmth. She caught his glances and immediately became embarrassed, scolding herself for her shyness, but couldn't help it. And one day, they bumped into each other not at work, but just on the street. To this day, Veronica didn't know whether it was a coincidence or if Max had orchestrated this seemingly unexpected encounter. But it didn't matter anymore. Veronica stepped out of a bookstore and collided with Max at the door. He smiled, holding the door open for her, and greeted her warmly. Veronica awkwardly responded to his greeting, feeling the hammering in her ears and the shivers running down her spine. That's the effect Max had on her. They met and nothing special was about it. It happens. Veronica continued on her way, but Max caught up with her a couple of minutes later. At first, he simply walked beside her in silence. Veronica didn't know how to react, and he seemed to slightly enjoy her confusion. "You're so cute when you're flustered," the guy finally said. "And overall, you're very, very beautiful and natural. I haven't met anyone like you before." "Thank you," Veronica murmured. The compliment made her head spin. Yes, she had noticed that Max looked at her in a somewhat special way, but she never thought he would confess his liking for her so directly. And what happened next? Well, Max took the initiative into his own hands. Veronica didn't even notice when she stopped getting flustered. They simply walked through the city with Max, chatting about everything under the sun, like old friends. He was such a wonderful conversationalist. It seemed that Max could engage in any topic. She found out that he was the head of a department at the gas plant. They had been cooperating with their travel agency for a long time, buying vacation packages in bulk for the exceptional employees as rewards for their diligent work. That's why Max periodically visited Veronica's boss. Max lived on his own in his own apartment, and most importantly, he wasn't in a relationship now, but he was actively looking. "Since childhood, I dreamed of meeting a modest, gentle, beautiful girl," Max confided in Veronica. "Since childhood, I had an ideal, Cinderella from the Disney cartoon. I thought such girls no longer existed. But then I met you, and it seems to me that you're exactly that." Veronica would melt from his compliments and pleasant comparisons. Only later did she realize that Cinderella wasn't the happiest or most self-sufficient character. She lived, toiled, endured, worked a lot, and didn't express any complaints. Yes, indeed, that's the kind of wife Max needed. He didn't even hide it. Veronica was just too naive and inexperienced to understand it all right away. The young couple started dating. Max seemed to be the reliable wall Veronica had always dreamed of. He knew exactly where they should go, to the cinema or a restaurant. He completely organized their leisure activities, gave Veronica gifts, surrounded her with care and attention. Veronica liked it back then. Finally, she didn't need to decide anything. It's so pleasant to feel that someone else is taking care of everything for you. And Max happily took responsibility for Veronica. Every evening, he would pick her up from the office after work, they would have dinner at some restaurant, and then stroll around the city for a long time. Sometimes they'd go to the movies, sometimes bowling. Occasionally, the couple would meet up with Max's friends. Veronica smiled at these people, but unfortunately, she couldn't find common ground with their partners. As a result, these joint gatherings made Veronica uncomfortable, although she tried not to show it to Max. She wanted him to experience only positive emotions around her. Veronica often adapted to him. She didn't always like the movies he chose, but she displayed enthusiasm. At cafes, she ordered exactly what her companion recommended. And so it went with everything. After all, Max had told her numerous times that she was the girl of his dreams. He called her otherworldly, unique, one of a kind, and Veronica simply didn't want to disappoint him. And then, after about a year of consistent meetings and dates, Max proposed to Veronica. It was quite unexpected, but it followed all the genre's rules, at a restaurant, under romantic music, with him kneeling down and presenting a velvet red box with a ring. Veronica covered her face with her hands and laughed. She felt happy and protected. Her dream came true. Now she would have a strong, close-knit family and a kind, well-off husband. She already had her beloved job and a good salary. Everything was as she had imagined it before. Could this really be happening to her? Of course, Veronica answered with agreement, as there could be no other way. Then came the introduction to Max's parents. Veronica was a bit nervous about how they would perceive her. After all, they were quite well-off people, while she came from a poor and incomplete family. But everything went well. Max's mother and father fully approved and shared their son's choice. It seemed that they really liked Veronica. Max talked so much about you to us, smiled the future mother-in-law. Now we see that he was right in his assessments. You're truly wonderful. However, Veronica noticed that her mother immediately had suspicions about Max. She understood this from her looks and expressions. It's your business, of course, the woman shared her opinion when Max left. But he seems a bit too, I don't know how to put it, self-assured perhaps. Isn't he putting too much pressure on you? Oh, come on, Mom. Veronica hugged her mother tightly. He's the most wonderful person in the world. May it be that way. At the time, Veronica thought her mother was just a little jealous. Well, of course, they had lived together as a duo for so many years, and suddenly her daughter's separate life was beginning. After the wedding, Veronica moved into Max's apartment, a spacious, elegantly furnished apartment in the city center, a wonderful place. Veronica tried to please her husband, maintaining their little family nest in complete tidiness. Max never seemed to make any comments to his young wife, but when he noticed disorder, he involuntarily grimaced. And Veronica tried not to let such situations happen. Max was neat himself, and he expected the same from others. The newlyweds decided not to wait long before having children. It was Max's wish. He really wanted a son, an heir, as he put it. For some reason, Veronica was afraid that they wouldn't succeed in having a child right away. At work, she had heard colleagues' stories about how it's not so easy nowadays, giving birth to a healthy, strong baby. Many undergo years of treatment before getting pregnant. And Veronica really didn't want to disappoint her husband. He loved it when everything went according to plan, and any deviations from the course irritated this organized person in every sense. But Veronica worried in vain. Just a couple of months after the wedding, she joyfully announced to her husband that she was expecting a child. Max smiled so happily that it warmed his wife's soul. She thought about how their child would have the most caring and loving father, unlike her own situation. The pregnancy wasn't easy. From the very beginning, Veronica suffered from severe morning sickness. Sometimes she couldn't even get out of bed to go to work. To her surprise, she noticed that it irritated Max. He did try his best, taking care of his wife, running around at night for anti-nausea medicines, personally accompanying her to all the ultrasounds and examinations, and even occasionally cooking. But too often, Max would recall strong women from the past who gave birth in the fields without any issues, and, worse still, he would bring up examples of his friends' wives who didn't even notice their pregnancies. It was hurtful, but Veronica stayed silent. She didn't want to argue with her husband. During one of the routine checkups, the reason for Veronica's poor condition was revealed. It turned out that she was carrying not just one, but two babies, twins, more precisely, fraternal twins. This explained her weakness, nausea, and other discomforts. Upon hearing this news, Veronica almost fell off the examination table, where she lay while the ultrasound technician moved the sensor over her still flat belly. First came the surprise, then the joy, which washed over the heart of the soon-to-be mother like a warm wave. Max, who was present at this event, looked a bit bewildered. "Is there at least one boy in there?" Max clarified. "Come on, Daddy-to-be. It's too early to talk about such things. And what does it matter? The most important thing is that the children are healthy and developing properly." Max had been fanatic about having a son, an heir. He often talked about taking him fishing, teaching him to swim, ride a bicycle, and he even planned to enroll the child in karate because, according to him, a man's character toughens through sports. Veronica was even afraid that during the next ultrasound, they would be informed they were having girls. Max would definitely be disappointed then, and perhaps he would even blame her, Veronica. Yes, recently Max had started expressing complaints about his wife. Her cooking wasn't up to par, and she didn't clean thoroughly enough. But this happened when he was in a bad mood. Otherwise, he still took care of Veronica just the same, showering her with compliments. And Veronica tried not to upset him unnecessarily, desperately hoping that at least one of their children would be a boy. She didn't mind either way, she already loved both children unconditionally. Soon it was revealed that Veronica was carrying what's known as a royal siblings, a boy and a girl. What a gift from fate. Max was content, they had an heir, after all. Veronica also felt relieved about this. Her belly was growing not just daily, but almost hourly. It was becoming very difficult for her to even move, let alone walk. Unfortunately, Max was often away at work, and he was frequently on business trips as well. He called his wife every day, inquiring about her health, lamenting that he couldn't be there, and immediately assuring her that he was working hard for her and their children. "I want our family to lack nothing," he would say. "I need my children to have the best of everything." As always, Veronica agreed with her husband, acknowledging the validity of his statements. But she still wished Max could be by her side. She desperately needed help. Thankfully, her mother didn't abandon her in this difficult situation. She went shopping for her, accompanied her to the hospital, and supported her in every way. And then the twins were born, a bit prematurely, as often happens with twins. A boy and a girl, Esteban and Estella. They were noisy, curious, and active. And everything started to whirl. Veronica dedicated all her time to her children now, swaddling, rocking, feeding, laundry, outings, and bathing. Max helped when he could, but he was worn out from work. Veronica tried not to burden him too much with household chores. She managed everything herself. The baby's cries, especially their nighttime awakenings, clearly irritated Max. Veronica could see it all happening. She felt a bit hurt, but she tried to stand by her husband's side. Yes, as a young mother with 2 infants in her arms, she was exhausted, but Max wasn't having it any easier. He had the responsibility of ensuring the family's financial well-being. He deserved rest and tranquility in his own home. And Veronica did her best to provide him with that tranquility. Time went on. The babies were growing. Although things were getting easier for Veronica, she didn't notice many changes due to her focus on the children. Max was becoming more distant. Now, he would disappear for days and weeks, citing work, business trips, important dinners, and various crucial meetings. Veronica didn't delve into the details, she didn't have the energy for it. And her mother. Her mother, who initially helped her daughter with the grandchildren so often, suddenly withdrew. At first, Veronica didn't notice. Her mother's eyes seemed lifeless, her migraines became more frequent, and she perpetually seemed tired. With her own problems keeping her occupied, Veronica simply didn't pay attention to all of this. Handling 2 infants was definitely not a small task. 3 years passed by unnoticed. Estella and Esteban grew up. Veronica decided that it was time to send the children to daycare and return to her beloved job. Yes, maternity leave was a unique time. It was wonderful to dedicate all her time to her children, family, and home. The apartment sparkled with cleanliness every day, and delicious meals awaited the household members. But Veronica really wanted to return to the office, dress stylishly, put on makeup, socialize with colleagues, and engage in her beloved work, translation. Plus, her own income wouldn't hurt either. No, Max was fully providing for the family. He generously transferred money to Veronica's account for groceries and toys for the kids, never demanding an account of how it was spent. But Veronica wanted to earn her own money again, to feel independent. The woman eagerly anticipated the end of her maternity leave. She hoped that when she returned to work, Max would look at her differently again, that the spark of interest would return to his eyes. Finally, it was done. The little ones were settled in daycare, and Veronica was back in the office. At first, she relished the new life. Work brought joy and inspiration, and social interactions invigorated her. But this wonderful period lasted far too short. The children started getting sick one after the other at daycare. First Estella started coughing, then Esteban suddenly had a fever. The daycare would call Veronica at work and ask her to pick up the twins. She would excuse herself to her superiors, rush out, and go get her son and daughter. This was followed by at least a 2-week sick leave, during which someone would fill in for the young mother. Veronica felt embarrassed in front of her colleagues and boss, but there was no other option. Max couldn't leave his job. He remained the main breadwinner. And her mother, she seemed rather weak and tired lately. Veronica knew that her mother often went to the doctor, taking care of her own health. To burden her with 2 small, constantly sick children went against Veronica's conscience, even though she knew that her mother adored her grandchildren. The in-laws weren't an option either. They lived their own interesting and fulfilling lives, hardly ever mentioning the twins except to wish them a happy birthday. Well, they had every right. It seemed that a little time would pass, and the children would adapt, stop catching colds, and everything would fall into place. But no, the endless illnesses didn't spare the twins. The pediatrician would simply shake their head. Well, there's a concept of non-daycare kids. Not all children are suited for preschool establishments. And yours, they're also premature. Apparently, their immune systems haven't matured yet. What should we do then? The distraught mother inquired. Once again, her young colleague had to cover for her at work for a long time, and the girl's voice on the phone today sounded extremely tired. But, of course, it wasn't easy, carrying 2 workloads at once. Veronica felt guilty towards her colleagues and towards her children. Well, what can you do? The doctor shrugged. The only solution is to take the children out of daycare. Frequent illnesses aren't the best strategy. They're already facing complications. During a family meeting, Veronica discussed the situation with her husband. The doctor says that it's not advisable for the kids to attend daycare, the woman said with a sad tone, looking at her husband. That's strange. Back in my time we didn't have this issue with children. All this is a result of hyperprotection in the first few months and years of their lives. You swaddled them up like cabbages, didn't let them toughen up. They were born prematurely and weak, Veronica reminded. There was no other way to handle them. Then you were just too overbearing, Max sighed. Well, how are we going to handle this situation? I thought we might hire a nanny, Veronica shared her thoughts. A nanny? Max contemptuously curled his lips. Some other woman will be raising my children, constantly being in our home. Not constantly, only during my work hours. I've already contacted an agency and... No, Max firmly said. I won't allow strangers near my children. Besides, it's not particularly cost-effective. Your salary won't cover the pay for a qualified professional nanny. And we don't need anyone else. So, it's better for you to stay at home and take care of the children. That's the only right solution. Veronica tried to object. She tried to convey to her husband how important her job was to her. It's not just about earning money, it's also a field for self-realization, for interacting with interesting people. But Max was unyielding. He categorically opposed the idea of a nanny and insisted that his wife should stay at home. Remember how good it was when you were on maternity leave? Everything was clean, the children were cheerful and calm, the house always smelled of delicious food. And what about now? Quit your job, don't even think about it. Someone has to take care of the kids, and it's not my job to leave my post. And Veronica had to accept this decision. Max pressured her. In fact, it had always been that way, even in the early days of their relationship. Veronica constantly adapted to his opinion. At first, she tried to please her beloved and therefore gave in to him in everything. But when she tried to express her own opinion, different from her husband's, she encountered his powerful pressure. Max couldn't tolerate objections and demanded complete obedience from Veronica. What had once seemed like a stone wall to her turned out to be just a cage or a trap with no way out. It was hard for Veronica to quit her beloved job. Her colleagues urged her to stop her, offering different options for arranging childcare, a private daycare, a nanny. But she knew very well that Max wouldn't agree with any arguments. He had clearly expressed his opinion, and only it had the right to exist. After working the required 2 weeks, Veronica returned home feeling dejected. She felt that she had made the wrong choice. And once again, the routine with the children resumed. Everything as always: laundry, cleaning, cooking, educational activities. The kids grew up. It was time for extracurricular activities. Veronica enrolled the twins in figure skating, hoping they would toughen up on the ice, become healthier and stronger, and then she could return to work. Though it was unlikely she could get back to her old position. Someone else had been hired for her role, so there was no way to go back. But surely, she could find another option. Time went on. The relationship with Max deteriorated completely. He no longer saw his wife as a partner, a beloved woman. She was just a nanny, a cook, a cleaner, a servant, nothing more. Max hardly spoke to his wife anymore, and when he did pay attention to her, it was only to criticize her about something. Veronica tried to reach out to her husband. She told him about her feelings and desires directly. After all, famous psychologists advised speaking your mind, being sincere with your partner. But Max seemed completely uninterested in his wife's inner world and feelings. "What can one even talk to you about?" he scoffed. "About frying pans, recipes, and the kids' achievements? Who could possibly find interesting conversations with a dullard?" Those words wounded Veronica to her core. Once, she had been the best student in her class, then a sought-after specialist. And now, she was stuck taking care of the children, while her husband considered her a limited dullard, a nanny. Well, in many ways, he was right. Veronica suspected that Max had a lover. He lingered at work way too often, and sometimes didn't even come home overnight, citing busy schedules. "What did you expect? I'm the one providing for the family. Just imagine the responsibility on my shoulders. It's not like wiping kids' runny noses and making paella. I work a lot, that's why I stay late," Max replied roughly when Veronica tried to communicate to him that he needed to spend more time with the family. The children needed not only their mother's attention but also communication with their father. But Max, it seemed he had lost interest in the twins altogether. Once, he had been fanatical about having a son. And now, as young Esteban reached out to his beloved daddy, Max completely stopped paying attention to his own children. It was as if they no longer interested him, as if he had grown tired of them. And then there was also the mother. Veronica became increasingly worried about her mother's health. Her mother had become thinner, more frail, and there was a constant sadness in her eyes. The woman tried to hide this sadness behind a smile. When she visited her daughter and grandchildren, she acted as if everything was fine, but Veronica could see it now. It was impossible not to notice. And her mother was going to the hospital too often, something that hadn't been the case before. Veronica tried to inquire about what was happening with her mother. But her mother always reassured her. "I'm getting older. What do you want?" Her mother would smile, patting Veronica's hair like she used to in childhood. Next to her, the mother of 2 children felt like a beloved and happy little girl again. Just blood pressure and other age-related ailments. "Don't pay attention, everything's fine." But nothing was fine. One morning, Veronica received a call from a neighbor informing her that her mother had been taken to the regional hospital by ambulance during the night. Fear gripped Veronica's heart like an icy hand. The woman hurriedly gathered the children, as there was no one to leave them with, and rushed to that very hospital. Her heart raced wildly all the way there. She had never experienced such fear for a loved one before. Veronica scolded herself for unquestionably believing her mother. It had been so convenient for her to think that her close relative was really doing well. Firstly, it brought peace to her mind, and secondly, she didn't have to take any action. Veronica was already overwhelmed with childcare responsibilities. And now her mother had been taken to the hospital by ambulance. Yet, maybe it could have been prevented. Veronica left the children with a young nurse who agreed to look after them. She seemed to genuinely love children. A kind face, an open expression, a sweet smile. At that moment, Veronica hardly cared about leaving the children with just anyone. She was searching for her mother. She wanted to look into her mother's eyes, hear her beloved voice, but it didn't work out. Veronica found her mother's attending doctor. It turned out to be an oncology surgeon. What a surprise! It appeared that her mother had been suffering from a cunning and incurable disease for a long time. The fact that there was nothing to be done about it was clear right away. For several years, doctors had done their best to prolong her fading life. Veronica's mother was taking powerful medications, fully understanding that it wasn't treatment but merely a postponement. She never spoke to her daughter about it. Surely, she didn't want to upset her. But we're not gods, the doctor shrugged. Yesterday your mother was admitted to us in critical condition. The disease took its course as was initially expected. She's in the ICU, there's no chance. The clock is ticking. Can I see her? Tears streamed down Veronica's cheeks. It happened, what she had feared so much. Soon, her most beloved and dear person would be gone, and there was nothing that could be done about it. But Veronica, she suddenly understood that she was still waiting for a miracle. Anything is possible, after all. When such a huge tragedy strikes you, especially suddenly, your consciousness resists and searches for a way out of the situation. You can look at her, but your mother, she's in a coma. She can't see, hear, or feel anything. Still, Veronica entered the room to see her mother. It was unbearable, seeing a loved one in such a state. Veronica held her mother's hand and gradually came to terms with what was happening. Her mother looked like she was asleep, a peaceful face, tightly closed eyelids. Veronica suddenly thought about how she couldn't recall if she had ever seen her mother sleeping. Her mother usually always woke up before her daughter and naturally fell asleep after Veronica. The doctor hadn't been mistaken. Veronica's mother passed away on the same day, just a couple of hours after the grieving daughter left the hospital. Veronica received a call informing her of the news she wasn't prepared for yet. It is worth paying tribute to Max. He supported his wife during her moment of despair. He organized the farewell himself, took the children to his parents since Veronica couldn't look after them. The woman was very grateful to her husband for all of this. Veronica didn't want anything, nothing interested her, even the children temporarily lost their significance for her. She felt that she was now alone in the world. Yes, truly alone, despite having children and a husband. Max, he was completely distant, cold, perpetually discontented, and judgmental. The children were still very young, and Veronica was alone against the cold and cruel world. But life went on. Veronica had to pull herself together and gradually return to her usual routines. Household chores distracted her from her heavy thoughts. The twins started to bring joy again. Max behaved the same way as before. Nothing changed. Cold and disdainful, nitpicking at his wife over trivial matters, and so very distant, a complete stranger. In this difficult year after her mother's passing, Veronica longed for support and care. She was always cold, even in hot weather. She simply lacked the human warmth that her mother had provided, even from a distance. Only now did Veronica clearly understand this, but her mother was gone, and Veronica was truly alone in the world. This was scary, disheartening, and sometimes even drove her to panic. In this very same year that was so challenging for her, Veronica discovered that her husband indeed had a mistress. She had suspected her husband's extramarital affairs before, but Max, he seemed to have stopped hiding it completely now. Once, a man left his mobile phone right on the coffee table, and his lover had just sent him a message. Veronica, of course, would never have snooped into her husband's phone, but a highly intriguing photo lit up the screen, a beautiful blonde in bright red lingerie. Veronica glanced at the message. Some Celia was shouting in capital letters, incredibly missing Max and eagerly awaiting the continuation of yesterday's adventure. Veronica paused and considered. Just yesterday, her husband had supposedly spent the night at the office due to working late on a report. As it turned out, the man hadn't been toiling over documents, he had been involved in an affair. Veronica scrolled through her husband's messages with the long-legged beauty. No doubts remained. Celia and her husband were lovers, and their relationship had been going on for quite a while. Veronica placed the phone back where it was. Did it hurt her at that moment? Perhaps not. Max had grown distant a long time ago. Besides, Veronica well understood that he had someone else. True, she believed these were different girls, casual flings, but it turned out that Celia and her husband had a long-standing and serious relationship. So, Veronica was hardly upset, only feeling a sense of repulsion in her heart, and the faint hope that her relationship with Max might someday fully improve evaporated. She wouldn't endure being around such a person, even for the children's sake. What should she do? What action to take? Veronica realized that she was in a vulnerable position. She had 2 6-year-old children to look after and no source of income. But she would think about how to rebuild her life later. And right now she needed to have an honest conversation with her husband. There was too much deception in their relationship. Perhaps after an open talk, her heart would feel a little lighter. Max emerged from the bathroom, settled on the couch in front of the TV, and picked up his phone. As usual, he didn't notice Veronica, who was sitting right there beside him. He delved into reading his messages. Veronica watched his face closely. What emotions would flicker across it? But there were no emotions. With a calm expression, he read the message from his young lover. Say hi to Celia from me. Veronica couldn't hold back. She wanted to see some sort of reaction from her husband. Max raised surprised eyes at her. So, you know, huh? All this with an ordinary, completely calm tone, as if having a lover for the head of the family was a commonplace matter. I know, Veronica nodded. By the way, she's cute. Rummaging through my phone, huh? Max managed to behave in a way that made Veronica feel guilty. Well, yes, I've always known that you're as brainless as a hamster, but I thought you were at least honest. Veronica let out a deep sigh. After all he had done, Max dared to accuse her of dishonesty. What self-assuredness this man had. Well, yes, I have a girlfriend, her husband didn't bother denying. And she's genuinely beautiful, takes care of herself, unlike you. Tries to make me happy and surprised. And you have nothing but pots and children's troubles in your head. I can't live like this. That's all. Max didn't attempt to deny. He honestly, sincerely told Veronica that she was an uninteresting, narrow-minded person, stifling to be around. It was particularly hurtful. This was our mutual decision, that I become a homemaker, take care of the children, Veronica almost cried. But you've turned into a hen, a common nag. You've gained weight, grown dumber. Being with you is impossible. Veronica looked at Max and realized that yes, for him, everything happening was business as usual. He had a beautiful girl for romantic affairs, for enjoyable pastime. And at home, a wife waited. Even if she had gained weight and grown dumber, she still provided comfort and obedience. What beauty, right? Only then did Veronica suddenly understand that such a role didn't suit her at all. I can't stay with you, she said. The words slipped from her lips before she could think them through. But right away, Veronica understood that it was true. And? Max looked at his wife inquisitively. It seemed he was genuinely interested in hearing her opinion for the first time in many years. And I'm leaving you, with the kids, of course. We're getting a divorce, Veronica calmly stated. The decision quickly formed in her head. She usually wasn't known for such boldness, and here it was, out of nowhere. Veronica understood that she couldn't stay with Max, simply couldn't. Otherwise, she'd soon lose herself completely, and that couldn't be allowed. Max laughed in response to her statement. It was clear that he genuinely found it funny. "What nonsense are you spewing, dummy?" Max said, managing to suppress a bout of unpleasant laughter. "Where will you go?" "To my mother's apartment," the woman confidently answered. "Don't worry, we'll have a place to live." "Do you really think you're making sense? From such conditions with 2 kids in a one-room apartment. It's much better than living in lies and cold," Veronica sighed. Right now, she was considering all the problems she would have to face: lack of money, tight space, the twins' adaptation to new conditions, and a bunch of other things. But at the same time, the woman understood the decision she had made was the only right one. She couldn't stay by Max's side. "Are you seriously planning to leave me with the kids?" Max openly laughed. His contempt and disbelief in his wife's capabilities, all of this hurt Veronica, made her doubt. "You, who haven't earned a penny in the last 6 years, you, who thinks money appears on a card with the wave of a magic wand, you, who has no idea about things like utility bills. When was the last time you paid for the apartment or called a plumber, for example, or a gas technician? You, who only knows the kitchen and the children." Each word from Max was like a lash to Veronica. Yes, her husband deliberately tried to hurt her, but in many ways, he was right. That's what's most terrifying. Veronica really hadn't worked for a long time, and she hadn't touched any bills either. Max paid for everything, and he solved problems related to repairs, utility payments, loans, mortgages. Veronica, she had somehow truly faded from life. Her mistake was that she had focused too much on the children, forgetting about herself. These efforts had yielded results. The twins stopped catching infections, both wrote and counted exceptionally well for their age, both excelled in sports, but now Veronica couldn't provide them with the most important thing: protection, a life in a complete and harmonious family, the attention and care of a father, which couldn't be replaced by anything else. This caused her a great deal of pain, but where could she go now? Staying with Max after this conversation would be even worse for all of them. Max didn't seem willing to let go of his wife. He even tensed a little when he heard that she intended to return to her mother's apartment. "Don't spout nonsense," he said, as always, with a contemptuous smirk on his face. "Where are you planning to go? And you're dragging the children with you, too. You're a housewife to the core. You're not capable of anything except spending my money. The only thing you're good at is raising children and cooking. So, focus on your job." Veronica winced painfully at these words. In part, Max was right. No, he wasn't right. He was just, as the more authoritative and stronger one, pressing down on her again, trying to make her feel insignificant. He was quite skilled at it. Veronica resisted. She recalled her university achievements, victories in school science fairs, and many other competitions, her excellent academic record, the words of Senor Pasquale that he'd never had such a talented student, and her mother's opinion. In crucial moments, words from her mother surfaced from the depths of memory, stating that Veronica was a very strong and determined person. Her mother was certain that her daughter could achieve anything she set her mind to. "I'm leaving, Max," Veronica said firmly. "Tomorrow, as soon as the children wake up." "How foolish you are!" Max exclaimed, grabbing his head. "Can't you think at all? What on earth are you doing? Do you even realize what kind of life awaits you and the children? Aren't you indifferent to all this?" Veronica saw that Max was afraid of her leaving and understood perfectly why. He was a successful person with an impeccable reputation. Max wanted to become a local deputy. He was already taking steps in that direction, and such a person needed a beautiful past. What could be more suitable than a perfect wife and 2 wonderful children? And suddenly there are divorces, mistresses. All of this, of course, would work against Max, so he was worried. It was nice to feel some power over this man right now. Veronica even smiled at her thoughts, which irritated her spouse. "What are you smiling about, you idiot?" Max asked. Max was no longer shy with his expressions. Veronica was a simpleton, a foolish homemaker, a dumb chicken. And now this. The woman couldn't understand why she had tolerated this for so long, why she allowed herself to be treated this way. From Max, she should have run without looking back long ago, even if he didn't have a mistress. You don't mean anything without me, the man continued. She's thinking of leaving. Well, leave then, good riddance. You'll stumble and crawl back. Veronica shook her head negatively. There was much she wanted to say to Max now, but she was afraid. Afraid that if she opened her mouth, she'd break down right in front of him, and Veronica really didn't want that. She didn't want to show weakness to this man, he wouldn't wait for her tears. I'll do everything to make child support minimal, the spouse continued to ramble. You'll get pennies. You're not used to working, the three of you will starve. You'll crawl back to me on your knees begging for forgiveness, remember my words. You mean nothing, zero without me, an empty space. Veronica remained silent. She looked at Max and couldn't understand how she could have once loved this man. Cruel, malicious, selfish, considering himself the king of this world, valuing no one else. Because Max treated everyone this way, or almost everyone. Veronica had witnessed this many times. His colleagues were dimwits, friends were fools and losers, only Max was the perfect person. Max took his wife's silence as uncertainty. He continued to paint darker and darker scenarios of Veronica living on her own with the children, and he didn't hold back in his expressions. He grew more agitated, more determined to prove to her that she was nothing without him. It seemed that Max genuinely believed what he was saying. Veronica felt that each of her husband's words drained her strength. Max was siphoning her energy, making her feel insignificant. Just a bit more, and she would believe him, believe that she was powerless without an influential, successful husband. She might decide it was better to endure, but to live without need. Shut up, Veronica suddenly said, surprised by how calm and firm her own voice sounded. Max was taken aback. What? He didn't understand. I said shut up. Are you serious right now? Did you make a mistake or something? What's with this behavior, a mistake? But not now. I should have run from you headlong many years ago. I've known for a while now how you feel about me, like. I treat you exactly as you deserve. Not happy about it? Go find a fool who'll treat you differently. That's it. This conversation annoys me. You've made up your mind, pack your things and leave. And when you crawl back on your knees begging for forgiveness, then we'll see how you sing. Max turned and left the apartment, loudly slamming the door behind him, and as a parting warning, he mentioned that he would return the next day around lunchtime, and it would be better for him not to find Veronica at home. Probably, Max went to see Celia, because the atmosphere at home had become so charged that sparks could have flown in the air. Veronica understood that her husband had given her time to gather her things. She could spend the night in the apartment that she had considered her home for so many years, and then pack her belongings and move to her own small apartment on the outskirts of the city. But the woman couldn't stay in this place any longer. Everything here reminded her of Max, his betrayal, and his disgraceful behavior. Veronica felt that when she left here, she would feel much lighter. The woman was right. She indeed felt a sense of calm in her mother's apartment. Here, Veronica had been happy. Here, she had truly been loved and accepted. The rooms of her childhood apartment seemed to be imbued with a special energy. The children felt something too. They behaved calmly and looked relaxed. I like it here, Esteban smiled, looking around his new home. Me too, Estella chimed in. Even though it's small, it's very cozy and warm. Cozy and warm, can't say it any better. Veronica felt the same way. And so began an entirely new life for the small family. Veronica managed to secure money for the initial period. She took her jewelry to a pawnshop, the same jewelry that Max had once given her, gold earrings, massive chains, jingling bracelets. Veronica wasn't particularly fond of these heavy, expensive trinkets, but Max insisted his wife had to look respectable, especially when going somewhere with him. Without hesitation, Veronica parted with the golden jewelry. They were associated with absolutely unhappy memories. The jewelry was accepted at a price much lower than the purchase price, as is usually the case in pawnshops. Veronica counted the not-so-thick stack of bills and sighed sadly. She had hoped for more. Well, at least these trinkets were good for something. The very next day after moving, Veronica filed for divorce and child support. Max didn't even try to dissuade her. Veronica breathed a sigh of relief. She had prepared herself for a fight. Max needed an impeccable reputation. He didn't need a divorce, but he didn't oppose it either. Apparently, he had already developed a new plan. The court awarded child support as a percentage of the father's income. When Veronica received the first payment, she smirked. It was peanuts. Max fulfilled his threat. He promised to pay minimal child support, and he did just that. With his connections, it was easy for him to conceal his official income. Well, Veronica couldn't say she was very surprised. She had been looking for a job for a while. She realized that she probably wouldn't be able to continue being just a homemaker and taking care of the children like before. It's okay, the twins are almost school kids already. Veronica quickly, within just 2 weeks, accustomed them to independence. Now Estella and Esteban could warm up their food, wash their dishes, and tidy up the apartment. They no longer needed their mother's constant supervision. Concurrently, Veronica prepared the twins for kindergarten, took them to doctors, gathered the necessary documents. Less than a year until school. Well, not a big deal. Veronica considered a few months in kindergarten important since she needed to work. True, finding work was a struggle. Veronica had been staying at home for too long, and before her maternity leave, she hadn't worked much. So, by her early 30s, she lacked the experience that employers valued. Veronica visited the doors of every organization in the city that required translators, sent her resume everywhere, but received rejections everywhere. The only thing Veronica's skills were useful for was translating for students. However, this income was too small and unpredictable. Sometimes there was an influx of orders, and sometimes it was dead quiet. In the end, Veronica gave up, realizing that she was unlikely to find a job in her field. She began to explore various advertisements, and things immediately got livelier. Veronica's first job in her new life was on the outskirts of the city. It was a huge farmer's market where she tried her hand at selling vegetables. The job seemed to be as straightforward as could be: weigh vegetables for customers, state the price, collect money. But there were pitfalls here too. The owner often scolded Veronica for the vegetables evaporating too quickly. She defended herself, proving that everything was under her control, establishing clear chains, the quantity of vegetables at the beginning of the day's sales revenue. Veronica always balanced it all. This is trading. You get it? The angry owner of the vegetable stall berated Veronica. You underweight a bit here, didn't add enough there. Slipped a few spoiled onions to one person, put some bruised tomatoes to another. The customer won't notice, but it's extra for us. It's not fair, Veronica tried to argue. But what's the use? The owner only got angrier at such statements. Fair, unfair. She's reasoning here. This is trading. You get it? Look at her, ripping me off. If she's so clueless, why did she even go into trade at all? In short, Veronica had to quit, and she was once again unemployed. She was running out of money catastrophically. Luckily, the children were now peacefully attending daycare, without the endless colds and sore throats. Both twins liked their new daycare. By the way, they attended the same preschool institution that their mother had once attended. Veronica started searching for work again. She didn't want to go back to being a salesperson. She realized that it wasn't for her. She lacked the knack and cunning that the owners of those stalls needed. However, Veronica was hired as a janitor by the HOA, Housing Cooperative, and now every morning and evening she had to clean several entrances. It was a very tough, physically exhausting job. Only now did Veronica realize how some people weren't accustomed to keeping things clean around them. She found all sorts of things on the staircases, but the poor woman had no other choice. The child support that Max paid for the kids wasn't enough to get by. There was, of course, the option to return to her husband, but Veronica didn't consider it. And not because she feared her husband's gloating. No, it was just that now without Max, Veronica felt free. Let her get tired, let her and the kids have to save every bit, but Veronica no longer had to answer to anyone or desperately try to please an adult man. No one offended or humiliated her or made her feel worthless and incapable. Veronica was her own boss. The change of environment also benefited the children. They became more mature, serious, and independent. Now the twins tried to take care of their mother. They would make her tea, mix flakes with milk, fluff the pillow. It was very touching. Esteban and Estella saw how hard their mother had it. They felt sorry for her, tried to support her. Taking care of the children was what gave Veronica the strength to move forward. Cold water, dirty entrances, aching back by the end of the day. It was tough for her, but she didn't see any other way. Veronica continued to search for a job in her field, but nobody responded to her resume. Too little experience, too long a gap in her career. Then there was a change in leadership at the HOA. The new broom sweeps differently. So, the boss fired all the janitors, deciding that it was cheaper and better to use the services of external cleaning companies. And Veronica was once again left without a job. She was desperate. September was approaching. The twins needed to be prepared for school. Max seemed to have completely forgotten about her and the children. He sent a pittance as child support and thought everything was fine. And asking him for help after everything he had said was something Veronica simply couldn't do, even though she understood that he was as much a father to the twins as she was a mother, and he had responsibilities in raising the children, which he had skillfully avoided lately. Help came from an unexpected source. Sarah, the childhood friend, knowing about Veronica's dire situation, suggested her candidacy to an acquaintance. This person had a small local shop of sorts. Household chemicals and groceries were sold there, a bit of everything. Veronica was afraid to go back to sales, remembering her past experience. But there was no time for contemplation, not at all. It turned out to be much simpler than the vegetable market. There was no need to weigh or calculate anything. After the physically demanding work of a janitor, the sales job seemed like heaven to Veronica, and the salary was decent too. Veronica was rejuvenated again. Now she would get her son and daughter ready for school. Yes, it was tough for Veronica's work, economizing on everything, dealing with kids. Veronica denied herself in many ways. And still, she never regretted leaving her husband. The only thing she sometimes mourned the lost career. After all, Veronica's beginning was so wonderful. She worked at a major tourist company, earned good money, valued and ready to promote her, but had to give up the job for the sake of kids and husband. And what did all this lead to? Was studying for 5 years at the university worth working in a small corner shop? A person without education could manage that. One evening, a tall elderly man entered the store. Doorbell jingled. Veronica, lost in important thoughts, involuntarily startled and directed her gaze at the visitor. A familiar face, that gaze, that walk. Veronica froze. She suddenly recognized her university professor, Professor Isidro Pascual. It was he who once predicted a bright future for the talented student. If only Senor Pascual wouldn't recognize her. For some reason, Veronica felt embarrassed to meet this man. No, Veronica didn't see anything shameful in the profession of a salesperson. It's just that Senor Pascual, he believed in her, rejoiced in her successes. The professor gave one of the most promising students many important and wise pieces of advice. He invested a piece of his soul in her, hoping that someday the student would surpass the teacher. Senor Pascual helped her get her first job, and she, Veronica, managed her abilities so poorly. Senor Pascual carefully scanned the shelves with his eyes. He was clearly looking for something. Properly, Veronica should have asked how she could help, but the woman, hidden in the shadow of the refrigerator, remained silent. He probably wouldn't recognize her now. Veronica had gained weight, matured. She didn't look the same as she did 10 years ago. Back then, Veronica was just a girl, naive, big-eyed, curious. And what had life done to her now? Finally, Senor Pascual found what he needed. He took a bottle of olive oil from the shelf and headed to the checkout. Veronica clenched up. Her heart pounded so much that it seemed the noise could be heard even outside on the street. The professor approached the cashier and handed her his purchase. "Hello," he greeted politely and even smiled. Senor Pascual didn't recognize her yet, not until now. He spoke amiably with everyone, a pleasant manner of communication. "Good day," Veronica mumbled. And then the professor attentively looked at her face. Veronica watched his reaction. Senor Pascual was clearly trying to remember where he knew this saleswoman from. "Veronica?" the elderly man finally said. Hesitant, he still had his doubts, but she couldn't deny it. Veronica nodded silently. "But what are you doing here?" the professor exclaimed. "How did it come to this, you working as a salesperson with your talents?" Veronica didn't even notice how she poured everything out to Senor Pascual. Perhaps he was in a hurry somewhere, but he didn't show it. The professor attentively absorbed every word of his former student, never interrupting her. And to her surprise, Veronica realized that she had long wanted to share her story with someone. The woman talked about the complex relationship with her husband, his betrayal, divorce, survival with 2 little kids, and strangely, her soul felt lighter. Veronica felt the silent support and sympathy from Senor Pascual. It encouraged her, gave her strength. "Well, life hasn't spared you, of course," Senor Pascual summed up when Veronica fell silent. "But it shouldn't be like this. People like you should work in your profession, that's the way it should be." "They don't hire based on profession anymore," Veronica shrugged. "I have little experience, a long gap in my career. So, sometimes I do translations for students for a small fee when I have time. For the soul, and not to lose my skills." That's how fate turned out, it seems. Fate, the professor pondered. Fate probably arranged our meeting today. I happened to end up in this area completely by accident, got off at the wrong stop, decided to walk home and stopped here, and here you are. Yes, it's interesting how it turned out, Veronica smiled. She was no longer embarrassed by the professor. He clearly understood her desperate situation and even pitied his former student. On the contrary, now Veronica was happy about this meeting. She was talking to the intelligent and knowledgeable Senor Pascual again. He patiently listened to her and cheered her up. And with his presence, Senor Pascual reminded Veronica of the happy times when she was a talented and promising student with a bright future ahead. Suddenly, Veronica remembered that she was smart, gifted, capable, and hardworking. First Max, and then the life circumstances associated with the divorce, made her forget that. Veronica felt like nothing, blamed herself for everything imaginable. But she wasn't like that, she was completely different. The professor reminded her of that. So, in short, Senor Pascual said confidently and energetically, "I just can't ignore this situation. My nephew is the founder of the company Anti. They deal with buying and selling real estate abroad." "Of course, I know that company," Veronica smiled. "I never thought that its owner is your nephew. I thought it was someone from abroad." "No, my nephew organized it," Senor Pascual smiled slightly proudly. "I even helped him a bit in some moments. But he's quite something himself, he always has been. Would you like to work for them?" "You're joking." I inundated their HR department with my resume. There was no response. I even called to find out what was going on. The phone response was standard: not enough experience, a long gap in your career, and the job itself requires high qualifications. Becoming an employee of Anti is my dream, an unattainable one. Unattainable, you say? Senor Pascual objected energetically. Of course, your resume doesn't look the best, but the HR employees don't know you as a person, as an incredibly talented translator, as a living soul. Angel will thank me later for having such an employee. Senor Pascual asked Veronica for her phone number. In a voice trembling with excitement, she dictated the digits. She still couldn't believe it. Her mind couldn't wrap around the fact that her life might soon change so drastically. Little did Veronica know, things would become even more incredible and amazing than she could have imagined. Senor Pascual kept his promise. The next day, Veronica received a call from Auntie inviting her for an interview. Veronica was as nervous as if she were facing the most important exam of her life. She was scared. Scared to not show herself in the best light, scared to let down Senor Pascual, who vouched for her. But the interview went well. Veronica effortlessly handled the tasks given to her by the stern-looking interviewer. The woman could tell by the interviewer's reaction that she was satisfied and even somewhat surprised. "We'll be in touch with you soon," the interviewer warmly smiled at the applicant. And Veronica left Auntie with the full conviction that it would be so. Not an ordinary excuse like the common phrase, "we'll get back to you if needed," but a promise to contact the job candidate in the shortest time. As soon as she saw the Auntie office, Veronica understood that it was her place. She liked everything about it, the environment, the working atmosphere, even the future colleagues who seemed enthusiastic and inspired. A dream job. They called Veronica back, told her what documents to bring and when to come to the office to start working. The woman's happiness knew no bounds. And what if Senor Pascual hadn't recognized her or hadn't even entered that small backyard shop that happened to be in his way purely by chance? She didn't want to think about it now. Veronica enjoyed her job, and she liked her colleagues too. Now she came to the office in an elegant suit, sat at her desk, turned on the computer, and immersed herself in her element, translating complex documents and announcements into her native language, corresponding with foreign clients, and sometimes answering calls. At first, her colleagues were wary of the newcomer. Only the best of the best made it to Auntie, true professionals in their field worked here. And here came a woman with no experience, off the street. As one of the veterans admitted, people were afraid that they were being handed another privileged person who everyone would have to work for. It had happened a couple of times before, but Veronica quickly showed that she came here to work. She even managed to help those around her, earning universal approval and acceptance. Her very first salary left Veronica in a state of mild shock. She understood, of course, that Auntie employees earned good money, but she hadn't even expected such a high salary. Her head even started spinning with joy. Veronica immediately decided that she would celebrate properly with her children that evening. The tough times were definitely over. And then came the New Year's corporate party, where Veronica finally saw her boss, the very same Angel, Senor Pascual's nephew, whom the elderly professor had raised as his own son. By that time, Veronica had been working at Auntie for only a couple of months. Throughout that time, Angel had been on a long business trip and had returned just before New Year's. He bore no resemblance to Senor Pascual in appearance. The professor was tall and slim, fair-haired and blue-eyed. Angel, on the other hand, was not very tall but broad-shouldered, dark-eyed, and tanned. He looked like an Italian, with the same cheerful, energetic, and sociable demeanor. Veronica kept thinking about how to approach Angel, how to thank him for the job opportunity. He noticed the new employee himself and approached her to introduce himself, and then he ended up chatting with her the entire evening. It turned out they shared many views, loved the same movies, listened to the same music, and even had similar dreams. It was astonishing. This was Veronica's first conversation with Angel, yet he had the feeling that he had known her all his life. And he felt the same way. He admitted it to Veronica himself. Everything happening left Veronica's head spinning. For some reason, she immediately trusted Angel wholeheartedly. She hadn't felt beautiful, desired, or attractive for a long time, and suddenly this person, so reliable, strong, influential, looked at her as if his happiness depended on her. Veronica hadn't thought that anything serious would come out of their sudden sympathy. After all, why would a man like him be interested in a divorced woman with 2 children? He could find a completely free beauty, younger, more beautiful, without a past. Surely there were plenty of those around him. But since their meeting, Angel hadn't seemed to notice anyone else. They started dating. Of course, Angel was the initiator of this relationship. Veronica was happy. She liked his confidence and persistence. He quickly established a rapport with the twins. They were genuinely delighted to meet Angel each time, and he made an effort to surprise them more often, sometimes taking them to amusement parks, sometimes to incredible entertainment venues. Unlike Max, Angel always sincerely cared about his partner's opinion. Veronica felt truly happy. Senor Pascual rejoiced in their union, saying that now he could be completely at ease about his nephew. And for Estela and Esteban, the elderly professor became a grandfather, kind, attentive, and wise. Recently, Angel proposed to Veronica. It wouldn't be accurate to say that this was a complete surprise for her. Veronica and Angel had come to celebrate this event at a restaurant today. On their way, they dropped Estela and Esteban off at Senor Pascual's. He was always happy to have the chance to spend time with the children. And in the restaurant was Max. There he was, pompous in a stylish, expensive suit, chatting away with a glass in hand, next to him a young blonde beauty, the same Celia from the phone's photo. They probably lived together in their apartment now. But the girl didn't look happy at all, a lifeless gaze, timid movements with a glance towards her companion. How ironic, the Celia in the photo appeared so bold, so courageous. Did Max manage to suppress even this vibrant bird? What a dangerous man he was. Veronica couldn't take her eyes off her ex-husband, and he finally sensed her gaze and turned towards her. Bewilderment. In his squinted eyes, there was a momentary flicker of bewilderment. He hadn't expected to see his former wife in such an upscale establishment. The spouses hadn't been in communication, but perhaps through some mutual acquaintances, Max knew about Veronica's difficult situation. Maybe he was still hoping that she would come crawling to him, begging for help. Well, now he understands that this won't happen. Angel, understanding the situation, offered Veronica a few times to leave, but to her surprise, she felt calm. She even liked that Max saw her this way, beautiful, successful, with a loving companion by her side. However, Max seized the moment to approach his ex-wife. Veronica headed to the restroom to touch up her makeup. Perhaps Max noticed this and followed her. "Well, hello there, wifey," the man smirked, catching up with her in the hallway. "Hello," Veronica smiled enchantingly. This man no longer had any power over her, absolutely none. "I see you've settled in nicely," Max continued with a honeyed voice. How unpleasant, predatory, and insincere he was. "I didn't expect such boldness from you," he went on, seemed like a shy, unassuming type, "but you've settled in so well, found yourself a rich sucker. Good job." Max was clearly trying to hurt Veronica. He was attempting to belittle her again, to show that his ex-wife was nothing without him. Veronica responded to this pitiful attempt of Max's with a smile. He didn't know, he couldn't even fathom that she was different now, that these kinds of tricks wouldn't work on her anymore. "I didn't find a rich guy, I found myself. Do you sense the difference, good-for-nothing hubby?" Max blinked in surprise, unable to come up with a response. And Veronica calmly continued on her way.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.